Maybe the performance was better, but the narrative stays the same. Talking Michigan football, we got Steve Deace on the line from Michigan, a podcast. The Wolverines with another difficult defeat on the road against a ranked team, Penn State 28-21, and facing the Irish of Notre Dame at the Big House coming up on Saturday. Aside from football, Steve, how are you doing today?
Aside from football, I'm great. But then there's football.
Then there's football. Then there's football. And then there's expectations versus the results, which leads me to the performance on the field. If somebody, meaning myself, could draw back from what the narrative has been, and let's say Jim Harbaugh was winning 50 or 60% of his games against ranked teams, and we were only judging this performance on the performance on the field, a difficult place to play against a top 10 team, and they played well. They played it down to the wire, specifically in the second half, played well. But obviously the narrative comes with it and overrides everything but the result.
And it's because the narrative has a lot of truth to it. Now, it's often selectively wielded, and, for guys like Paul Feinbaum and Barrett Sallee and Clay Travis. And I like a lot of those guys' work as college football fanatics. I mean, I follow them as well. But, for example, before last week against Iowa, James Franklin was 0-11 in his career on the road against ranked teams. Because his name wasn't Jim Harbaugh, nobody knew. Okay. So there is this thing out there. It's a little, and it's like what I see in the political arena with the president. I mean, he can be bad all by himself. He'll make all kinds of enemies all on his own. Now, we don't have to conjure up fake news stories, over at ABC with, and CNN and other networks. And the same thing happens here with Jim Harbaugh. The facts are good enough. You don't have to have Harbaugh derangement syndrome on top of it. And those facts are these. And in fact, I'm going to start with one that you didn't mention, because I think it's the most tragic stat in the history of Michigan football. If you include the second touchdown Penn State scored on Saturday night, Mark, which was on the first play of the second quarter, because they ran out of time in the first quarter, and then Sean Clifford scored on the first play of the second quarter. You count that play. On the road against ranked teams, in the first quarter, under Jim Harbaugh, Michigan has been outscored 70-3 in his career. That's incredible, because it speaks to the lack of preparation by the coaching staff and the lack of poise by the players. And I mean, to me, I think that is the most damning stat of them all, because you're talking about a coach who came from the NFL, where right now, in fact, if you went and looked, you go to a sports reference site and you look up coaches all time in the NFL who have coached at least 4 years in that league, he's got a top 5 all-time win percentage. The NFL is a coach's league. It's all about preparation. Those coaches work insane hours, pouring over every last detail of film. They do it with their players who don't have 20-hour, deadlines with class and everything else. It's a technocratic league. I mean, you would think, if anything, Michigan would be over-prepared. Too many scripted plays. They're too rigid in their preparation. So I'd urge your audience, go watch the first play of the game on Saturday night, and you're going to watch several Michigan players walk, as in stroll, walk casually to the ball coming off the sidelines. Michigan takes so long to get set up that they have to call a timeout to avoid a delay of game penalty on the first play of the game. In the first half, they had 5 wide receiver drops, 3 pre-snap penalties, and an ugly interception on a screen pass. I don't even know what to say to that, and that's their back against the wall effort. And I want to give them credit for how they battled back, Mark, but that's a little bit like, when you congratulate your kid when he first gets his license for rescuing himself from the one car accident that he caused. Hey, you saved yourself when you wrapped the damn family car around the telephone pole. Glad you're safe. Yeah, I mean, we're glad you're safe, but you caused the accident. I mean, we got safeties on KJ all week long. Every gumshoe analyst in the country, anybody who's thought, I can be a college football analyst for 3 seconds, probably had the take of, I bet Don Brown will isolate a safety on KJ Hamler again. Snap, it happens. Okay, I mean, to quote the great prophets, the talking head, same as it ever was. So, you look forward for the rest of the year. There was 3 main objectives of this season. 2 of them are already gone. There's one last one that remains, but I'm sure I'll feel differently when we get to the game, but I'm just really not in plucky spoiler mood at this particular moment. And you're sitting here with a roster with 39 4- and 5-star recruits, and you're out of the Big Ten race a week before we even get to November. It's a fail. And there's no other way to put it. I mean, there were several game management issues. I don't know why we're out here kicking field goals from Harrisburg on a 4th and 5.5. Just freaking go for it, man. We get down to the goal line at the end of the game. We have two, not one, but two 6'5" wide receivers. You know, last year, Nico Collins led Pro Football Focus amongst all college receivers in contested catch rate. We didn't just step back and throw the ball up to those guys that, you know, are 6-7 inches taller than Penn State's corners one time inside the 10. I don't know what they're doing. I wish I knew. Maybe I don't, because maybe if I found out this stuff was actually all thought through and plotted, I'd be taking it even worse than I'm taking it right now. And you know, we're sitting here in year 5, and we have the most hollow 730 win percentage you could possibly have. So I want to believe, I know you're going to ask me, you know, was it just a moral victory back against the wall, or did they find something on offense in that second half? Here's the answer. Nobody knows. And no one will know until Saturday against Notre Dame. If they beat Notre Dame, and don't beat them like they did Iowa, but they beat them because they scored a few touchdowns on offense, then I think we can say they have turned the corner offensively. But, you know, I'm big into debating things that we know are going to happen but haven't happened yet. Because why debate something when the certainty of the answer is forthcoming? Just wait for the answer to get here. To me, I think you debate the answer after it's happened. You don't debate an answer we haven't gotten yet. So we're going to get the answer on Saturday night against Notre Dame. What's Michigan have to play for? I don't see much, but I'm not one of the players. You know, that's for them to answer, and they're going to answer that question for us on Saturday night. And then I think we have a debate and discussion based on the answer that they give us.
You're producing the segment for me, Steve, because I certainly thought, okay, I need to serve up for Steve. This is unlike a Michigan-Notre Dame game that we've seen, at least during the Jim Harbaugh era, in regards to the Big Ten being taken away. With a second loss in the Big Ten, the college football playoff being taken away. So a game that we anticipated all season as meaning a great deal for these two particular programs, and it does still for Notre Dame, being taken away for Michigan. It's almost a no-win situation from a critic standpoint, in which they're going to be able to bury Jim Harbaugh and this program. If you lose, it's obviously just gets thrown onto the pile. If you win, well, of course you won the one that didn't really matter, because this isn't going to count for anything tangible.
Yeah, I think we can retire that this is the biggest game of the Harbaugh era meme, which I participated in, because I think there's been a lot of truth to it. But I think we can retire it until the Ohio State game, because of what you just said. They cannot retire any of the other narratives. Sure, they'll have beaten a top 10 team, but okay, now you're 2-10, and you beat them at home. So how come you faceplant on the road? They can't do anything to change the brand this week. What they can do is send us a signal that they're interested in changing it, you know? And I don't know if it's a dream crusher loss or not. It's very possible that it is. And I thought going into this game against two top 10 teams, either to put it together and win them both or lose them both, because I thought it'd be tough to get up off the mat. And I got to tell you, listening to the post-game radio show Saturday night from State College, you know, the announcers are Michigan folks. They're going to try to come up with ways to encourage the players and tell them, hey, there's still a lot to play for. And I didn't sense a lot of the players were taking that bait and running with it. They sounded to me like a team just lost the last game of the year. Now, you're also dealing with college young people, though, that can be pretty resilient 24, 48 hours later. And sometimes, you know, the kind of thing like, you know, you had a University of Michigan student putting his name and cell phone number on a note to Ronnie Bell, who, you know, Michigan isn't in that game Saturday without Ronnie Bell. And yeah, he dropped that pass and he's got to catch that ball. He's a scholarship wide receiver. It's a bad play. But I know you've been watching our team, Mark. Ronnie Bell is the least of our problems. We need more Ronnie Bells. Okay. That's the cruel irony of this. That this should have been one of these other guys like Tariq Black, who leads the nation in almost catches. He should have been the one dropping that pass. It's a shame it was Ronnie Bell, because he's the guy that has been the one consistent performer all year long on that side of the ball. But, you know, you got this Michigan student who's out there ripping him and telling him, I'm embarrassed to have you on campus with me. That can be the kind of thing, you know, for guys that were maybe thinking of mailing it in. and you see one of your own take it, like that in the backside, that can be a rallying cry. I think it's really difficult for us as we get older to know if we're not on a college campus with these guys all day long. I mean, it's a given. I'm motivated to play my biggest rival, but aside from that, I think it's really hard for us to know the machinations and motivations of Gen Zers, at 3:00 on a Tuesday. There's no way of knowing that. That's why I think we're just patient for a few more days, wait and see how they perform on Saturday night. If they win the game, then I think that means that they're interested in playing this out, because it wouldn't be the season we had hoped. But if you beat three of your three biggest rivals, you beat all three of them, and you're 10-2, you're going to play in a major bowl. Hell, you might be in the Rose Bowl as a New Year's Six representative in that scenario. And that's a good season. Not the season we wanted to have, but it's not a fire the coach season either, unless you're on, meth. So I think you have to let it play itself out. Now, if I were betting on this, I would not bet that Michigan will pick themselves back up off the mat, simply because we haven't seen them do that very much in this era. They're a great front runner. They're great when they can bully you, not so much when you can punch back, and that's what makes the one on Saturday night different. Yes, they technically lost to Notre Dame last year on the road after falling down 21-0 by a touchdown, but that game didn't feel anything at all like this game did on Saturday night. I mean, Michigan had over 400 yards of offense. Penn State had less than 300. Michigan nearly doubled them in first downs, ran about 30 more plays. You have to win that game, Mark, with those stats. I'm sorry, you have to. But they could not get out of their own way enough. So that's why there's more optimism that maybe they turned a corner, because it doesn't look like your typical Harbaugh road loss, except for the way that it began, but certainly not in the way that it ended.
So I'm guessing that you're asked by your viewers, such as I am on a regular basis, to do exactly what you just pointed out a minute ago, to get into the hearts and minds of 18 to 21-year-olds and determine what the motivation is, what the bounce back factor is. The resiliency, yes, we can determine to be pretty high for young men of that age, but I tend not to do that, because they're 80-some individuals that will get into a game or something close to that, and the left tackle might be intimidated by the All-American defensive end coming up that he's playing this week, but the wide receiver might be salivating against what he's going to fit, and all sorts of different motivations and family situations and girlfriend situations that are going on and swirling around in their heads. Who knows? But in regards to producing the show, again, with me, Steve, and I rarely jot anything down before I start these. Yes, Ronnie Bell. I put him right. I just had to make sure, okay, I need to ask Steve about Ronnie Bell, because one of the more disappointing, I don't want to get too off on the deep end of emotional displays, but just viewing him on the sideline, unless you have an ardent interest in the game as a Penn State supporter or Michigan hater, did you take any joy in watching Ronnie Bell after exactly what you just pointed out? He has been not the most talented wide receiver they have, the most productive wide receiver that they've had, and watching him care so much and feel such disappointment in letting down his teammates at the end of the game.
Yeah, when he dropped that pass, I just got my voice back yesterday afternoon. I had a screaming fit, and I think I threw my iPad about 20 yards across the room. And somehow, by miracle, it actually survived. Okay? I was livid in the moment. And then about 3 seconds later, they panned to the shot, and the young man, and I don't call them kids. They're not kids. We got people dying in Syria and Iraq right now, a lot younger than these guys. They're grown-ass men. All right? They got the capability of making babies and voting presidents into office. They're not kids. They're men. But to watch that young man sob like that, I suddenly went from fan to father just as quickly as my anger flashed when he dropped that ball. It subsided just as fast. And I started seeing him now as a father myself. And I just wanted to put my arms around him. It was a terrible play. It's an inexcusable drop. I mean, it just is. It's if you know your Super Bowl history, it's a Jackie Smith almost kind of. Okay. But when you see, you can't suffer, as a fan. When I used to do daily sports talk radio, and if the home team would struggle, and fans would call in and say, you know, we're getting screwed by the refs. The coach doesn't get a technical, doesn't get a flag, just stands there and does nothing. And I remember I used to think, Mark, this sounds really weird. Like you care more than the guy whose livelihood is on the line. I don't understand that. But then I realized what they meant by that. What they meant was, you know, this is my team. I love my team. And we're getting shafted right now. And I want to know that that we have empathy. We're on the same rhythm here, the same wavelength. We're feeling the same thing because we're flying the same colors. You know what I'm saying? And that's where, when you see a guy who's given his all, maybe if it was one of these guys that's been one of these prima donna players this year, you know, and then you're like, well, I don't know, maybe if you were less attention to your NFL scouting profile, you might have caught that pass. But it's been a guy who's out there every Saturday giving you everything he has. And he's a 2-star recruit from Kansas City that is playing college basketball right now. And when you realize that the level of suffering that he's going through right at that moment, I don't know how you can do anything other than suffer along with him.
Talking Michigan football, the Irish come to town to the Big House. This has not been a series necessarily, Steve, that you have endorsed as being a year series, correct?
Yeah, I hate it. I don't think any Big Ten team should play Notre Dame, actually. I think every Big Ten team should have the stance, you want to play us, join the conference. Especially now that they're a member of the ACC in every sport but football, and that's about a little bit more than a third of their schedule every year. We have our own network. We can get on national TV anytime we want, playing anybody we want. We don't need them. You know, why help them gain any more of a demographic footprint in our demographic footprint at all? I thought this was the first Harbaugh decision he made I vehemently disagreed with, was bringing this rivalry back, especially the way he did it. Have the first game at home, because remember when the series ended before, they ended it after a home game, which meant they got to play us at home back-to-back times. And then we had to play them in the middle of the conference season. It's a terrible scheduling spot anyway. We don't gain anything from playing them at all. We don't need them to get exposure, attention. I'd much rather adopt what Ohio State has done for years, which is play 2 nobodies. They didn't do it this year. But most years what Ohio State does is play a couple of nobodies. There's that home and home against Texas and USC, and you move the team around. Virginia Tech. I love that. I love that process. And I'd much rather see Michigan do that because it takes on, when you have a non-conference rivalry game, it takes on an added strain on your team when you already have conference rivalry games. Because when Ohio State goes into Husky Stadium in Seattle, no one has a mental edge there because they're both oddities. They're both intellectual curiosities. There's not decades of familiarity and contempt and water under the bridge, right? You know, it's the same reason why when Ohio State goes and plays a game against TCU, they're like, wow, that's Ohio State. And when Ohio State goes to play a game against Purdue, they're like, dude, it's just Ohio State. You see them every year for 150 years. You're not intimidated. Yeah, you know, they're better than you, but you're not scared. You know they put their pants on just like you. You see them every single year. Well, when you play a team with a rivalry, that's a third rivalry game now. That puts a lot of strain on your program from a wins and losses standpoint. Now, in another cruel twist of fate, with the way this season unfolded, it actually ends up being the perfect game probably to have scheduled right now. Because if you're playing Indiana on the road this week, playing Maryland on the road this week, and you just had a potential dream crusher loss, and you go to Sleepy College Park, you know, and guys are already calling their agents and figuring out which Fleabag bowl game they're going to sit out of, you know, and you get ambushed. That's why I think this is a key game, because if you're not up for this game, you just don't plan on, you've checked out for the season.
Got Steve Deace on the line from Michigan Podcast. We encourage you to jump over there, whether it be on YouTube or your favorite audio platform for Michigan Podcast every week. Finally, Steve, looking at Notre Dame, we have the one benchmark game for them in Athens. I'm going to partially ignore the letdown the Bulldogs had at home against South Carolina. We know that they're one of the top 3 to 4 most talented teams in the country. How good do you think Notre Dame is?
Solid everywhere. No real glaring weakness. Nothing that really blows me away either. Their defensive front is good, not as terrific as it was last year, where they had these edge guys, but with a Jerry Tillery type of Mo Hurst player in the middle that could really blow up the middle of your line. That was a tough block. All right. They don't have that kind of player this year. Offensive line is solid because they've recruited well there. Not nearly the dominant unit it was with Quentin Nelson 2 years ago, and not as good as the unit they had last year, but they've recruited well there. So solid. Skill position talent, not as good as I thought it was last year, but I also don't think it's terrible either. I think it looks to me like a program in the 10th year of a head coach who's comfortable in his own skin and has been given time to build an infrastructure. Went through this period, after the 4-8 season in 2016, where they replaced both coordinators. They've completely solidified now. Since then, they've found their stride. So Notre Dame's not going to come in here and beat itself. Michigan's going to have to win the football game. Notre Dame's going to play its game. It knows who it is, and it's going to say to Michigan, you have to out-execute us. And if Michigan does, they'll win. And if they don't, they'll lose. It's just that simple.
You can get to my Week 9 college football predictions by grabbing the link in the description section below at Voice of College Football Community, Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. We appreciate you stopping by as always, Steve. It's always a good discussion.
You bet, brother. Take care. Go Blue.